Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Fast Performance Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Cole Thomas. On this week's edition, we welcome on a returning guest, the first returning guest on the show, Mr. John Cole, co-owner and one of the managing partners here at Fast Performance on the strength and conditioning side. JC, if you guys don't remember him, has a long, extensive history in the strength and conditioning world, having done this for more than over 25 years, working with Ski Club Vail, which is where he originated, working with people like ski racers, lacrosse players, soccer players, all sorts of people in different athletic disciplines. He's primarily started working on softball players and baseball players in this last offseason, these last couple of years. And he's a great resource for you guys to learn a little bit more of the mechanics of strength and conditioning and how to improve your strength and conditioning in the offseason. We talked to him about putting the conditioning back in strength and conditioning, use the operative word, to enhance athletic performance, utilizing better ways of training ourselves outside of just the pure strength part of training. He's a great conversation. I know you guys will enjoy it. Here he is, John Cole. JC, thank you for coming back. You're our first recurring guest on the show.
I love it.
You got the distinct honor. So for guys who maybe are new to the show and didn't listen to the last time you were on when we still had Connor, can you give a description of like who you are and what got you into the coaching realm and the sports performance realm?
Sure. So I'm a former Division I ski racer. Grew up doing it all my life. I played some baseball, youth league, farm league, Babe Ruth league, that kind of stuff. Growing up, hockey was my first passion, but I got into ski racing just based on growing up in the Northeast. And out of college, I moved to Vail and got into coaching ski racing for about 8 or 9 years and realized there was a deficit that existed. I don't mean to date myself, but this is about 25 years ago. There was a deficit that existed in the strength and conditioning world, especially for alpine and snow sports in general. A lot of the athletes were getting hurt because of non-existent programming. And so I kind of reinvented myself at that time, joined the NSCA, got my CSCS, and now 25 years later, I am a CSCS, a Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist with distinction from the NSCA, in addition to being a registered strength and conditioning coach, minimum of 10 years experience in the field. And I'm also a Exos Performance Specialist. From all that, it wasn't just snow sports. I've obviously worked with a lot of field sport athletes, lacrosse, soccer, ton of tactical work, and then, of course, baseball. Yeah. Which we run mainly out of this facility.
We do a lot of it.
Yeah, we do a lot of it. Yep. And it's been great to be able to work with those guys, and it's also given me some observation into the sort of current training techniques or strength and conditioning techniques that baseball uses. Going back to my own background in the last 6 to 8 years or so, I've realized there is a massive educational deficit in the conditioning portion of strength and conditioning. And when I speak of conditioning, I'm not just speaking of it in terms of metabolic or cardio. I'm also speaking of it in terms of movement skills. Yeah. And so it's been great to work with Joel on the floor because he's a genius at that stuff. And we work really well together. And I think we're starting to move the needle with the baseball players, but it still has a long way to go.
There's still that little breaking the wall. Like you got to break them down. Like you can't just play all these meaningless bullshit games. Like that's what's going to make you better.
Yeah, exactly.
So like you said, you wanted to. You have a big emphasis on the conditioning side of the strength and conditioning.
Correct.
I think when we pitched this idea, we wanted to talk about putting the conditioning back in strength and conditioning. So what are the unique challenges that come with training baseball specific conditioning as opposed to other sports like ski racing or hockey or anything that else you've worked on?
I think it's the culture. To be honest with you, because I think it's kind of overlooked. They the question is, why do I have to run? Well, you got to run the bases. Why do I have to run if I'm in the outfield? Well, you got to chase down fly balls and everything associated with that. And I think, it's important for everyone listening to this to understand it from the standpoint of energy system development. It's not just metabolic. It's not just cardio. It's, people that are conditioned, like I talk about it in lacrosse and soccer all the time. I talk about it as fourth quarter performance, right? And if you have a certain level of conditioning, then your ability to stay at a high performance level over, say, a 9-inning game, and that's just not physically, that's mentally as well. If you have those energy systems built and in place, it helps you with simple things like concentration and movement skills and agility and even swinging a bat or pitching a baseball. Mm-hmm. And so I am a big proponent of saying that people who are conditioned the right way will have the energy to last deep into a game and perform at the highest level.
Right. And I think it's like, how do you address because you think about like in lacrosse or in hockey or whatever, there was constant movement throughout the game, whereas a right fielder, he may not be involved in a play until the 7th or 8th inning, a ball doesn't get hit. So that's where there's always that kind of that difference. And what are like the challenges in dealing with a sport with constant movement like a football or a basketball, or where you're at some point you're going to be moving regardless of if you're involved in the play or not. But if I'm a right fielder, a ball's not hit to me for 7 innings.
Sure.
Unless I'm obviously when I'm hitting, but like if I'm just sitting out there in the outfield, nothing happens. Yeah. How do you train, guys to be ready for those situations when you're not even guaranteed for something to happen for you?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think one of the biggest issues that you see in baseball injuries are a lot of pulls, a lot of strains, things like that, because, to your point, a lot of these guys are standing still. If the pitcher's hot and he's striking out a lot of batters, there's not going to be a lot of balls going out into the field.
Right.
So if you look at it from the standpoint of just those types of injuries, what's usually happening is the player is static for a long period of time and then all of a sudden has to get from point A to point B as fast as humanly possible. Mm-hmm. And that is what is one of the biggest issues. This is opinion-based only. That takes place with, let's say, non-throwing athletes like pitchers. Yeah. And then, the other piece that's associated with that is, being able to get a little bit of movement in between plays, keeping the body loose, things of that nature. So I think that's the first most important point. The second most important point is to understand first step quickness, right? And for all players, first step quickness can make or break the difference between a play and an error. Or let's say in the outfield, a caught fly ball or a hamstring pull because they took off, literally in the wrong position. Their muscles were absolutely cold, and all of a sudden they had to perform with speed.
Yeah. So now, previous guest of this show, Grant Richardson, was a guy you worked with this offseason. What were his key? What were the biggest things you worked on with him this last offseason? He's an outfielder. He's a big, explosive dude. Yes. Hits mammos when he's in the batting cage. Yeah. What were the keys in working with him this offseason? What were we trying to address to make him a better baseball player?
Yeah. Grant was he came to me. He was an interesting case because he showed up just to work on hitting.
Right.
And he, saw some of the work that I was doing with other field-based athletes, hockey, lacrosse, things of that nature. And he was like, I could probably get something out of this. And so he approached me and said, hey, I'd like to work on this stuff with you. And I said, absolutely, no problem. So looking at it from the standpoint of somebody who is a pure hitter like Grant, okay, think about the fact that he's able to hit, big shots over the wall, but what happens if it doesn't go over the wall?
Yeah.
And he's got to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. Perfect example is that social media post of him hitting the inside the park home run.
Yeah, Grant had it inside the park home run, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago?
I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Of this recording, at least.
Yeah. And if you think about inside the park home runs, you have to count on a couple of errors from the opposing team to pull it off.
Of course.
But Nonetheless, the minute he hit that, he was gone from the batter's box and literally had a great sprint all the way around the bases to slide into home and get the home run. But the key piece is to be able to work on that explosive power from first step. And we spent a lot of time doing single leg jump mechanics, single leg sprint mechanics, acceleration, deceleration, and multi-directional movement, because obviously all four bases are not in a straight line.
Right.
So to be able to, get those change of direction skills are very important. Also for Grant, he's an outfielder, right? So I keep saying this. Outfield is a very, very tough position. As you pointed out, you could stand out there for an hour or two and not move, and then all of a sudden you got to sprint to chase down a fly ball. And so I think it's very important for people to understand it's not just straight line speed, it's multi-directional movement, and more importantly, the power of first step acceleration. So that's just from the movement skill side. Now, here's the second piece associated with that. Innings, especially when they're going late from a conditioning standpoint, right? Let's say that, a batter gets inside the park or a double or a triple or something like that, and he's in the 8th or 9th inning, and he hasn't been moving a whole lot. Well, guess what? Now it's time to move rapidly. And it's not just the first step. It's how fast you can get from point A to point B with well-developed energy.
Right.
And that's where I don't think I can emphasize that point enough, because I watch a lot of the college players down on the floor in the gym, a lot of the high school players down on the floor in the gym, and they're all trying to get big.
Yeah.
Right? They're all just, lifting weight and, probably lifting a little bit more than they should. When I'm a big fan, and Joel is as well, as talking about field sport athletes, if they want to get to that next level, is lean and fast, lean and fast. You want to be able to get from point A to point B rapidly. You want to make sure you have the energy systems. You want to make sure that you have, obviously, strength and power as a foundation.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily see these players really packing on weight necessarily until they hit the bigs or they hit the minors even.
Yeah.
And so I watch college ball a lot. I watch high school ball a lot. And they're not huge guys, but holy moly, can they swing a bat, can they throw a ball, and they can get from point A to point B.
Right.
So I think that's where, going back to what I was talking about, it's that culture shift is not to focus so much on what I refer to as linear strength and power, bilateral squatting, bilateral deadlifting, all those things. I would rather see those athletes in high school and college be working on balance, movement, yes, strength, but do strength unilaterally. Instead of doing a double leg deadlift, do a single leg deadlift.
Yeah.
Instead of doing bilateral squatting, have them do Bulgarian split squats or rear foot elevated split squats. All of these things are important from the standpoint, and you've heard me say this before, in what sport are we equally weighted on both feet?
Right.
Right? Pretty much none.
Yeah.
I mean, you could make an argument that maybe Olympic weightlifting at the Olympic level, but even then, if I slid force plates under their feet, I guarantee you they're not dead even on both feet. So the question remains, why do we train that way?
Right.
If there is no sport truly where we're equally weighted on both feet, why does our culture train that way?
Right.
And it's sort of this is the way we've been doing it for the last 50 years. Why should we change now?
Right.
You have to think progressively. You have to think innovatively. You have to look at it from the standpoint of saying, what is going to benefit me the best for my sport and my position within that sport?
Right. So one of the things that you're talking about in the culture, and I want get your input on this, it's old school as hell, this whole notion that is there any validity, and there will be a lot of pitchers who will, depending on your answer, will make or break what they think about conditioning.
Yeah.
Is there any validity to the, it's the old school way of conditioning pitchers was the go run for a mile, 3 miles, whatever, like the slow jog, like, Jason has like the whole, like, you got to go run for 20 minutes and all that. Is there validity to that, or is there just, that's like what coaches would say, like, just go run because I don't know what the hell to do with you anymore. And because we think, like you're saying, like, baseball is a explosive sport.
Yes.
And distance running is not an explosive sport.
100%.
So, like, you're not really training the correct energy system by this old school style of conditioning.
And you're not really training the right fibers in the muscles either.
Right.
Because, things like distance running, cycling, distance swimming, all those things, those are very slow twitch fibers within the muscle. Mm-hmm. And, for an explosive sport like baseball, you should be training fast twitch. And that's where Grant, for example, and I spent more time working on, 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s for sprint mechanics, knowing that was going to be roughly the distance that they were going to have to work into.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but let's face it, a pitching coach or a hitting coach is really good at pitching and hitting. Right. But to your point, they don't have any understanding of what conditioning is. So it's, go run a mile or go do this or go do that. Now, the caveat with that is anything is better than nothing, right? Okay, so if they're doing something, that's terrific. But I would also say there's very little science and recognition of the demand of the sport behind telling a pitcher or a hitter to just go out and run a mile.
Right.
So, and I'm not saying that pitching and hitting coaches need to become, conditioning experts by any means, but making them understand and really observe the sport demands just a little bit better, it's going to become fairly obvious as to what the energy system is that they need in order to be better at their sport. And I'm not going to speak up here to the science about, whether it's glycolytic or anaerobic or aerobic, whatever else.
This is what you need to know.
This is what you need to know is I would say there's nothing wrong with them doing some type of distance running to get some type of metabolic base.
Yeah.
But I would also make an argument that a little bit of sprint work wouldn't be a bad idea either.
There was an old, I forgot who did this, but there was an old piece on like a conditioning based thing for baseball players. And I think it was like the first 1 or 2 weeks was maybe building up like a mile or two, like it's just an aerobic base. And then you move into the sprints.
Yeah.
Because is there like as long as you can have that base, of just like a distance running, distance running, you can be like, all right, now I can have that like just in the back tank.
Yes.
And then I can just go.
Yeah, there is. And I'll try to put this in layman's terms as best as I can, but building that metabolic or aerobic base is like building the foundation of a house, right? You're not going to start framing the house on
just the ground.
On just the ground. You know how that's going to turn out, right? So to be able to build that foundation first, then starting to put those explosive movements and mechanics and sprints and multi-directional drills on top of that foundation is going to lead to better outcomes. And I think it's important to get that, sort of base energy system in place just from the standpoint of, like you said, saying, okay, I have this. Now I'm going to start moving into something that is a little more specific for my sport.
Right.
And like I said, I think every single sport can benefit from this. Some even more than others.
Yeah.
When you get into the endurance sports, that's a whole different batch of science that goes around that.
Right. So with baseball being such a long season, and I mean, you and I have talked about this before, and I think it's kind of a very, very much a theme of what we like to bitch about here in the facility of youth guys, high school guys playing all these multiple games throughout the week, almost too many games throughout the week.
I agree.
How would you tell a high school athlete listen to this? How would you approach in-season conditioning so that they can maintain their peak performance and reduce injury with the caveat of like you play almost way too many games?
Yeah. Well, it's important to understand that I think you have to kind of chunk it. And what I mean by that is, okay, if in the off season or the preseason you want to do, your lifting program or your resistance training program, and even there are some points where it's appropriate to lift heavier when you're getting into, strength, hypertrophy, things like that. But when it gets into the season, the whole goal when you get into the season is longevity, right? And you are valuable to a team, you are valuable to a coach, you're valuable to a scout when you go through that entire season and you remain uninjured, right? And you're able to perform at the highest level. So, like we did with the Colorado Mammoth, which is the indoor pro box lacrosse team.
That Joel works with. We talked about that last week.
When we get into that season, we're literally holding them together between games.
Yeah.
So we're doing a lot of recovery work. We're doing a lot of, speed-based lifts, movement skills, things of that nature. Are we lifting heavy? No, we are not. And part of the reason is because that's actually that lifting heavy in the middle of the season is actually going to slow you down. It's going to slow everything down. Your velo off the mound, your bat speed, your ability to get from point A to point B. So I'm a big fan of saying, there's a time to hit that strength phase and the power phase, but put that out before the season. Now, I'm not sitting here saying don't lift weights in the middle of the season. I'm saying if you're going to lift weights, please do lift weights in the season, but lift them fast. Okay,
right,
and that's a pretty key piece. The other piece is look at the game schedule from a micro periodization standpoint. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's say that the games are on the weekend. And, you have 5 days from the last game until your next game, okay, just as an example. And I know that that's not always the case. That's best case scenario. But even if you have 3 to 5 days, the first day after a game, if you're going to the gym, it should be recovery work. It should be foam rolling. It should be stretching. It should be just light movement skills, things of that nature. The further away from that next game that you can add a certain amount of, speed strength work is a good thing. So let's say Monday was your recovery day, after, 8 games or however many they played over the weekend. Tuesday would be a good day to do some type of speed strength work.
Right. And
then Wednesday, thinking that you might have a game on Thursday, is the perfect day to not do resistance training, but do speed-based work. Mm-hmm. Things like jumping rope, reactive agility drills, things that are going to get the brain firing quickly, right? And if you get that neurological system firing quickly, the day before you go into a game, you're more likely to have success in that game.
Right. That's something like, people have gotten into like the, maybe heavy, like 90% of like sets of like 1 or 2, but like 2 to 3 reps. I know there's been a lot of people who've gotten into the heavy lifting, but like it's more to maintain the strength as opposed to, you're trying to make those gains. Is there like a validity to like doing like heavy singles or 1s or 2s, but like maybe they're in that 5-1 rep, that 1 rep max, like just to maintain the strength throughout the season?
Yeah, single sets, low reps. I mean, is there some science behind that? Yes. Mm-hmm. I prefer, and this is, my own opinion, to look at it from the standpoint of saying you're not going to lose what you built in the off season if you don't lift heavy. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you have a certain amount of resistance, I'm not saying 90% of your 1RM, I can say unequivocally it's somewhere going to be between 60 and 70, and maybe even less if you're trying to move the resistance quickly, right? Then you're still going to get the benefit of stressing the muscle fiber out in such a way that you're not going to lose that by any means. The goal is not to gain in the season. The goal is to maintain in the season. And that's why, like I've even looked at some of these collegiate lacrosse strength and conditioning programs, and they have them doing max testing 3 days out from a game. And I'm like, you guys are not looking at this the right way.
Right.
Because all that's going to do is slow them down. It's going to make them sore, and they're not going to be reactive.
Burns them out neurologically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So what role does, moving into more mobility, flexibility, because I know Grant's a really good example of that, a little bit of a stiffer athlete.
Yes.
What role does mobility and flexibility play in a baseball athlete's conditioning program, like if you're building one, and how do you address those aspects to enhance a player's performance?
It's movement through space. Mm-hmm. It's free movement through space. When I look at an athlete run, I can tell whether their hips are tight. I can tell whether they have good thoracic mobility. I can tell, are they lordotic? In other words, do they have, a curvature in the spine, or are they kyphotic in this way? And all of these things are going to...
Throwing out the big words.
Yeah, sorry. All of these things are going to sort of initiate for me the movement that I'm, the movement skills that I'm going to work on. Yeah. But if you don't have free mobility through space, okay, then your injury risk goes up. Right. So somebody with tight hip flexors, for example, is not going to have a decent stride. Okay, and that's something that Grant and I worked on a lot, is not overstretching the hip flexors, but getting them mobile. You never want to overstretch a hip flexor. I'm just using that as an example. But the idea is like, getting good active recovery and passive recovery techniques, foam rolling, even massage work. And I don't mean the beach massage where you're holding hands with your spouse. I mean, finding a good massage therapist that's an absolute digger and is going to get in there and get that tissue to open up. It's not a fun experience, but it definitely has its advantages. And so being able to have a mobile athlete that athlete is far less injury prone. And I think that's the best way I can say it. And, just to go down the rabbit hole briefly on that, any strength and conditioning coach that comes forward and says, I have an injury prevention program, run in the opposite direction, because you're never going to prevent them all.
No.
You're never going to prevent them all. And that's why I cannot stand the injury prevention thing. It should be injury reduction.
Yeah, or mitigation.
Or mitigation, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And, like I said, if the athlete is mobile, then they're able to react freely through space without the potential of a hamstring pull or a hip injury or a knee injury or God knows what else they could have, shoulder injury.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Fast Performance Baseball Podcast with JC. I hope you're learning a lot from JC. He provides a lot of good value and a lot of good information. I wanted to pause real quick to remind you guys that without your support, none of this is possible. I love having you guys watching these videos, listening to these podcasts, listening to these experts in the field, learn things that you can adapt into your own personal careers and add more value into the baseball community. I'd love if you guys could like, share, and subscribe to these videos, share with people who would find great value in these videos and with the knowledge that JC is providing, as well as all the other guests we've had on in the past. Once again, I want to just thank you guys so much for watching and taking advantage of all the information that's been thrown into, that is utilized and taught in these shows. And I hope that you do learn a lot. Back to JC. Is there and I know this is one of those like case by case basis and every athlete's different, but is there like, you're speaking on flexibility and like not overstretching like a hip flexor or an internal rotator in the hip, but is there like I don't know how to phrase this, but like an optimal range of motion or an idealized range of motion where guys can be like, if I can get to this range, okay, I've covered my base there.
I hate to answer a question with depends, but it depends. It is one of those things that is truly a case by case basis. I can't make a blanket statement and say, oh yeah, they have to be at
45 degrees,
45 or 60 degrees of range of motion in their hip or whatever else, because you have somebody like Grant who is a large mammal, but he's not tall, right? But also, he was a little overbuilt when he came to me. And, so he had already had that massive foundation of strength and power. What he needed is more of that freedom to move through space. And so that's where we got into active and passive stretch modalities, a ton of foam rolling on a lacrosse ball, doing active isolated stretching, breathing. All of those things are going to assist with that.
Right. So how do you, and this is something you're very locked in on, keyed in on with a lot of the athletes that you work with, is power development. What are some things that guys listen to this, like some key exercises or drills that would be very beneficial, or kind of like a catch-all that like they can explore on lower body explosiveness, upper body core explosiveness that they can utilize in their own training programs? If they don't train here, you should be training here. But if maybe this is someone that's like in Kansas or something like that, or in another state.
Power is usually the last phase of our periodization before they go into the season, because I built the foundation of the house doing strength and endurance. I put in the first floor, which is usually like hypertrophy, muscle building. I build the second floor, which is speed and strength and speed strength, right? That's the utilization of that larger muscle mass that I put on them in hypertrophy. And then we go into power, which is usually the last thing that we do for the season. When we go into power, the most important thing is dropping the load, okay? If you're lifting heavy all the way up to the season, you're going to be slow. When you get into that power phase of development, I usually cut the loads in half and then get them moving rapidly. Yeah. So, going back to my bilateral two-footed thing versus one-footed, excellent exercises, as long as they're done under the supervision of a professional, would be something like a single leg deadlift to a snatch with a dumbbell.
Right.
Being able to do a lot of rotary med ball work.
Yeah.
What we're trying to achieve. I mean, obviously, we use the Kaiser equipment here, which is pneumatic based. Which, if you haven't heard of it, you should, because it's definitely excellent to train. The utilization of those pneumatics is great for training for power. It's important to know that those power-based exercises need to have as much full free range of motion as you can, and those power-based exercises, we also take them and carry them over into the season.
Right.
So we're getting that fast twitch, we're getting that neurological response, we're getting them moving rapidly through space, and then acceleration, deceleration, okay? And that's just sound movement mechanics, sprint drills, things of that nature. So I feel like there's not really one exercise. It's more like an overarching philosophy.
Like everything can be power-based if used correctly.
100%.
And done in the right circumstance.
Yeah, like doing speed bench press.
Yeah.
Instead of heavy bench press, right?
Right.
Doing speed squats instead of doing heavy slow squats.
Yeah.
It's all about tempo and changing the time under tension. Heavy time under tension is going to build muscle, but it's a very, very slow tempo. If you're doing high tempo exercises, then you're obviously building power, but the goal here is not to slow them down. And a lot of people think, oh yeah, for power I need to put this amount of weight on. It doesn't need to be a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So now, I know, and comes with a lot of kids, is there's this like, I think, I don't know, it's like a dying, because the kids that we're dealing with now were not alive for that time period.
Understood.
We're bringing back the Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds type thing, where everyone has that whole, like, I need to get big, I need to get, right, like, just big implies strong, right? And as you were noted earlier, like, there's a difference between being the right kind of strong and the right kind of built versus being overbuilt, which you very much harp on Hill. Like, athletes are getting almost overbuilt at this point now.
Correct. And the overbuilt athlete is the one that is more injury prone.
Yeah.
They may look good in a baseball uniform, but understanding.
Is there like an idea, like, and it is like, this goes back to the flexibility and mobility.
Yeah.
Is there like in your mind, or like, is there kind of a consensus, or of like what a baseball athlete should kind of look like? Is there, and it's like why baseball is kind of such a unique sport. Is there's, you've got an Aaron Judge, 6'8", 6'9", 280 pounds, versus a Jose Altuve who's 5'6", maybe,
right?
100,
or Mike Trout, or
yeah. But like, but I think you notice, like, even with how big the differences in height, there's a similarity in builds with a lot of the guys. Like there's a build, but there's a powerful build. Is there an idealized like body type, or a way that you can, guys can be like, okay, I want to work to attain this, and this will get me here?
I think it once again, here
Depends.
we go. It depends. But I also have noticed unequivocally that a lot of these guys don't get big until they get to the bigs.
Right.
And I think that's important to understand, that how do you get there, right? A scout that takes a look at you and says, oh my gosh, this guy's big, and then he doesn't have any bat velocity, or he doesn't have any ball velocity if he's a pitcher, or he can't get from point A to point B. Well, that's terrific. He's going to look good, but that's not going to make him much of a better ball player.
Right.
It's interesting to note that the NFL is just starting to get on board with a program called MBR, which is muscle to bone ratio. I've been reading a lot of white paper research on this.
Talked about before,
and it's very new, but I would say in the next 10 years, maybe a little bit longer, you're going to see the overall size of the non-line players in the NFL change. And I'll use this as an example. edge rushers, right? Edge rushers are big. Don't get me wrong. Aaron Donald is big, okay, and he's an inside rusher. But he's fast. Oh, my God, he's so fast. Like, I'll sit there, J.J. Watt, he's fast, right?
Like Von Miller's maybe the prime example.
Von Miller's actually an excellent example of a guy who, he's not the hugest player on the field, but he's lightning quick, right? And that's somebody who has built that progressive foundation, like I talked about, through the entire off-season programming. So I feel like the ideal muscle-to-bone ratio is really what is going to come down to change not just the NFL, but all sports, baseball included. It's difficult because, yes, these high school and collegiate players, what are they looking at? They're looking at the guys in the bigs. What they need to be looking at is what's going to get them recruited, right? And, scouts want to recruit a good baseball player. They don't want to recruit just somebody who's big. And that's where that overall sort of visual philosophy, especially in the high school athlete, needs to change. And it's not just baseball. It's systemic. It's everywhere. It's definitely in lacrosse. It's definitely in high school football. It's in all sports. And, they need to understand, a lot like hockey players do, that if they don't have the stamina to last 3 periods in hockey, they're going to be worthless to a potential scout, whether it's at the collegiate level or the pro level. And those guys may be big, but they're pretty lean. Because it's such an anaerobic sport. And obviously that's different. I'm comparing apples to oranges here, but you have to understand that it's more about what's going to get you to the next level. A high school athlete that's looking how big Aaron Judge or Mike Trout is, okay, that's not where you want to be right now. It eventually, assuming that you go through the system and you're successful and you get the call up, okay, that's a little bit different then. But understanding that you need to think about what's going to get me to the college level, what's going to then get me to the minor league level, what's going to get me to the major league level, instead of, looking out across the horizon line and seeing that, image of what you think you should be. And unfortunately, our society is that way.
So one thing you guys, I talked to Joel about this last week, and I wanted to get your input as well, is how you guys utilize mental conditioning and, mindset training into our strength and conditioning programs. Something you're really big on is, let's do, I know you've done this with Carly, who's our big softball player now, going to University of Nebraska Omaha. But something like, it's a post that we've put on social media before. Of, she's using a Vertimax band as resistance, going around kind of like in a figure 8 motion around these giant hula hoops that you bought with a light board. Like there's 1,000 things. And she's got a conditioning ball that she's roping around her hips. She's got 5 different things going all in one moment. But like, how do you work to train that? And like, have you worked with other baseball players on like, it's basically just like creating chaos as much as you can. Because like what I talked with Joel last week is, sports is just organized chaos.
Yes,
really.
it is.
And
or disorganized chaos, depending on how you look at it.
Theoretically, it should be organized. But,
exactly.
Training people to be how to expect the unexpected and be ready at the the snap of a finger to be able to react and perform at an optimal range, or their performance is good with all the things going on around them.
So let's assume that you've more or less done for the body what you need to do, right? For the hardware, now we need to train the software, which is up here. And that is simply, based on what I refer to as neurological stimulation, right? And, let me backtrack for a second. I'm sure Joel said this already, but we don't train baseball players here. We don't train lacrosse players. We don't train hockey players. We don't train alpine athletes. We train athletes in general. And the idea is to make the athlete a better product that you as the pitching coach can work with, or a batting coach can work with. Now, going back to your question about that sort of neurological stimulation, I mean, if you look at it from that standpoint, it's multitasking, right? How many things can we throw at an individual that is going to ask them to perform at the highest level and change their range of concentration? This is becoming really big in sport performance, is being able to get that stimulation and manage it, right? And, IMG has these $150,000 light boards and, and all these reaction tools. But at the end of the day, to be able to do simple things and then another simple thing and then another simple thing all at the same time is actually enhancing the athlete's neurological stimulation to be able to manage several things at once. Right? And so I feel very strongly that look at it from the standpoint of a batter, right? Batter's got a lot of decisions to make in a very, very short space of time when that ball leaves the pitcher's hands. Even prior to that, right, if the pitcher has a tell about what they're going to throw or anything like that, but it's limited time to process that information, right? So they have to be able to make a decision in the blink of an eye. Am I letting this ball go by, or am I going to take a swing at it? If I'm going to take a swing at it, where is it coming in?
Getting the bat on plane.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many different things that are going on here. Pitchers, even more so, right? I mean, they're getting signals. They're thinking about their throwing mechanics. They have to be cautious of the guy that's at first with the big lead that's going to steal.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of different things going on, just using baseball as an example, where that type of neurological training can help. When the software is functioning the right way, the hardware will function the right way.
Right. So I got two more things for you.
Yeah.
And I want, it's a little bit more of like the inspirational part of the podcast right now. We've gone through like the whole, we've done all the hardware stuff. And we've done I asked this to Joel last week, and you're in the same boat as well, is you've worked with a variety of athletes,
yes.
right? You've worked with, high school athletes all the way to, for people who don't know about JC's, this is another thing, just go Google what this guy has done. But you were the head of performance for Ski Club Vail.
Correct.
Right? I think that was the official title.
Yeah.
You've worked with the highest levels of ski racers like Lindsey, Vonn, and Mikaela Shiffrin, gold medal at the highest possible level competitors. Mm-hmm. What are some things that separate, and I use this as because have you ever read Relentless by Tim Grover?
Oh, yes, I have.
So you know where I'm going.
Yes, I do.
What are the big separators in all of your experience working with high-level athletes to the lower-level athletes that separate the good from the great to the elite?
Yeah. Couple different things. First of all, great athletes are coachable. Mm-hmm. They're humble. They can take direction. They listen to their coaches, whether it be me or you as a pitching coach or whatever else, and they're able to take direction, process it, and actually put into practice, what they're learning. The second thing is understanding that you're not going to be perfect all the time. You have to be able to take a step forward or a step backwards to take a step forward sometimes. Mm-hmm. And changing mechanics is a very difficult thing to do, whether it's in strength and conditioning or whether it is in pitching or hitting or whatever else. And you have to be patient and trust the process, not the outcome, right? You can't be focused on, okay, the high school player, I want to play college ball. You have to be thinking about, okay, what do I need to do to get there? And then, working with some of the World Cup athletes, working with Grant, Carly, some of my higher performing athletes, the one thing I notice unequivocally across the board is they do the little things the right way. Mm-hmm. Okay? My mentor, Mark Verstegen, is always a big fan of saying, do simple things savagely well. Right? So, they have full and complete concentration in everything that they're doing all the time. And it's important to understand that, if it's a day where you're doing warm-ups or you're in the middle of doing your warm-ups, whether it's your band work as a pitcher, whether I have you do movement prep, whether I'm having you jump rope, something as simple as that, you are putting all of your energy into what's going on there. This is difficult, especially for high school athletes. They got a lot going on. But when they walk into the facility, whether it's to work with you and Jason or whether it's to work with me or Joel, they need to be able to put all of that stuff in the parking lot and only focus on what's going to happen for the next 60 minutes.
Right.
That's what separates good from great. And if you're just going in there and going through the motions because, this is what my buddy did, and, this is how he got recruited to college or made it to the minors, you're in the wrong place. You're wasting your time. Right. And then the second piece is what I refer to as the 23-hour rule. Okay. they're only in with us usually about an hour a day. What are you doing for the next 23 hours? Are you focused on sleep? Are you focused on nutrition? Are you focused on taking care of your body when it's not there?
Right.
Keeping your stress levels low, staying ahead of your workload. All of these little things also change the good ones to the great ones.
Right.
And I think that's important for people to understand that, you know, it takes an amazing amount of concentration and sheer will to want to get to the next level, but it also is a process that takes place every hour of every day.
Yeah. So you basically answered the next question, so I'll ask you a different one. So, you know, something in a sport where, and baseball is kind of almost in a similar range to ski racing and downhill ski racing, where there's very little separators between the good and the bad, right? You know, in baseball, like, how many guys in the major leagues now throw 95 plus? Like,
right.
You know, for in layman's terms, like the same thing in tennis. Like, what separates the number 1 guy from the number 20 guy?
Yeah.
You know, what separated Lindsey and Mikaela from the rest of the field in downhill skiing in a sport that, you know, for people who maybe don't watch downhill skiing, the difference between first and second place is 1,000th of a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
The difference between first place and fifth place is 1,000th of a second.
2 things I would say. First one is grit. You know, the stick-to-itiveness of an individual. And I think, you know, without going down too far a rabbit hole, and I'm probably going to get hammered on this one, but it's a generational thing too. There's a lot of...
You can't say Mikaela's a generation. She's my generation.
I know she is. I know.
You make fun of me all the time.
I'm talking about the high school athletes
Gotcha.
a little bit more, but you know, it's having a good family support system that is not paving the path for the child, right? And that's important. And then I think the second thing that is the most important thing about this is those athletes are able to achieve a flow state. Every top performing athlete understands what a flow state is, and you know, in layman's terms, a flow state is when the game slows down, when the race slows down, when you're able to see things before they happen. And a lot of that comes down to the software, the psychological aspect of visualizing success, right? And that's something that Stephanie Zavilla, our sports psych, talks a lot about. You know, you see athletes like Mikaela and Lindsey, when they do a course inspection, the first thing they do is go down to the finish, they lean on their poles, close their eyes, and they run the entire course in their head. But they don't just run it, they win it. Yeah. And that's the difference. They see themselves doing it. So, you know, the concept of the race is won before you even step in the starting gate, right? And I think that's important for people to understand that, you know, the psychological component of sport cannot be overlooked. And it, you know, going to speak with a sports psychologist or somebody that can help you with this, the stigma that used to be attached to this is, oh, well, if you're going to go talk to them, you got something wrong with you.
You got the yips.
You got the yips or something like that. And that's not the case at all. It's performance enhancement.
Yeah.
You're already performing, right? And the brain is a muscle just like the body. So if you're able to train the brain, the way you train the body, you're more likely to have success early on in your career than figuring out later, I got to go see a sports psych for this.
Right. For everyone listening, I've been putting in on our track for our pitchers, I put in a pitcher's visualization. It's like a Brian Cain thing. Guys, it's 10 minutes a day.
Yeah.
You just did
10 minutes a day.
If you just did 10 minutes a day of visualizing, like we get into things like flow states, like JC was just talking about.
Yeah.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to plug? Where can people find you on? I know you're not a social media person, but
I'm not a social media person, but anybody can reach out to me through the website or jc@fastcolorado.com if you have questions or anything like that, or you want to bounce ideas off me, or if you completely disagree with me, feel free. I'm happy to take the criticism on it.
Right.
But I don't really have too many plugs other than understanding that, you know, whether you decide you want to work with us or you want to work with another facility, make sure that you have the best coaches in that facility to enhance what you're doing. There's a lot of people out there with cookie cutter programs that are not working with the individual and what the individual's needs are. Make sure you do your due diligence on that.
Right. Awesome. If you guys want to if you want to test your metal and do an FTP test too, you can always reach out to JC. He's the man for that. So awesome. JC, thank you so much for coming on again.
No problem.
Now I'll have to get you on for the third time.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, Cole.
Yeah. Thank you once again to JC, and thanks again to you guys for watching this episode. I hope you took a lot of value out of everything JC talked about. You learned some new things, you gained some knowledge, you learned some things that you can add to your own strength and conditioning, to your own strength training as you progress through the rest of the summer, into the fall, into the winter, and along into the next season. I want to thank you guys once again for listening. Please go like, share, and subscribe, to find more content like this, to see more of the show and find more people that, have great value to offer to you guys. Please, in the comments, tell me anybody you would love to have on the show, any topics you'd like to see covered more. Please put them out in the comments below. I love that feedback. I want to, be able to help you guys and be a conduit to help you guys throughout your career. I will see you all next Tuesday. Thank you so much.